Hello everyone and welcome to this episode, the peer learning one, of Women Talking About Learning. I'm Andrew Jacobs. The idea of learning cooperatively with people across organisations is something I'm very keen on. The idea that someone, somewhere, knows the answer and the learning function's role is simply to connect those people is a reframing of what the learning function could and potentially should be. With that background, I was really looking forward to this episode, and we have two amazing guests to talk through it. Our first guest is Sheridan Webb. Sheridan is the community manager of the Training Designers Club and owner of Power Hour training materials. She has almost 30 years' experience in L&D consultancy in a wide range of industries and is passionate about making practical training quicker, easier, and less stressful for busy L&D professionals. Our second guest is Liz Needham. Liz's career focus has been on people and organisational development since 2007. She's passionate about facilitating practical, context-specific learning that delivers change. Liz is known for creating reflective spaces and helping leaders to step back and understand how they can think and work differently. This episode is so far up my street, it's parked in my garden, and I'm sure that you will love it too. Recorded in March this year, this is Women Talking About Learning. This is Sheridan and Liz talking about peer learning.
Hi Sheridan, nice to be speaking to you today. How are you doing?
I'm all right, thanks Liz. It's nice to see you again. Really looking forward to this actually.
Yeah, so we spoke actually a few weeks ago, didn't we, about peer learning, and I guess this is an opportunity to maybe follow up on some of that and raise some new areas as well.
Yeah, it's one of those topics, isn't it? When you start looking into it, it's everywhere. It seems to be connected to all other aspects of learning, which I think is perhaps why we are so interested in it and so keen on it, and we're so bought into it ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. So where should we start then? Where should we kick off?
Um, I think it's probably worthwhile just clarifying what we mean, I suppose, by peer learning, because it's one of these phrases, isn't it, that's thrown around, and we might all mean different things by it, and that's fine. But what in your mind is peer learning?
Yeah, I think it's a good question, and I think it gets kind of blended in, doesn't it, with lots of other things like social learning and
Communities of practice, learning by community, which is obviously our
yeah,
thing.
yeah, and I think also sometimes just thinking about the word peer, we don't kind of use peer that often in our day-to-day language. So I think sometimes that can be a little bit kind of confusing and
Yeah.
off-putting for people in terms of what do you mean by peers. So for me, it's about where groups are acquiring kind of skills and knowledge and experience by helping each other and supporting and learning with each other. So it's not where you've got a kind of almost expert teacher learner situation. It's really where you are working with a group to share knowledge within that group, and there's some shared interest. So there's either a shared, it could be a shared role, it could be a shared purpose, it could be a shared goal, but you've kind of got that exchange of learning with and through others at the same time. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that fits really with my understanding of it. Really, I mean, I think my slight twist on that was, for me, I always think of peer learning as being very informal. But I know
That's
that
interesting.
sometimes it can be formal, because we know that as part of successful management development programs and things, you will have action learning sets and you will
Yes.
have chat groups now and things like this. So that they can be set up and they can be managed formally, but in my mind, peer
Mm.
learning is something that happens almost by accident and informally, either in the workplace when you turn around and speak to that person on the desk next to you, or you trot over to someone in the other team and just go and ask them a question, or as we both work independently, we're both self-employed, when we reach out to our communities and our groups and just drop a message
Mm.
in a WhatsApp group to say, oh, has anybody come across,
Yeah.
and then you wait and see what happens.
Yeah, I think that's quite an interesting take on it. So I guess I've got a slightly different perspective. So I've experienced them both informal and formal,
Mhm.
and I think one of the kind of really tricky balances and the kind of the magic fairy dust is getting that balance right between how far does does peer learning or some kind of community need to be managed, guided, have some kind of structure around it,
Yeah.
and how loose do you leave it? And I think it depends on the situation. But I've definitely worked on longer term development programs where we very consciously brought together a group into a peer learning group who, possibly wouldn't have thought of themselves in that way before.
Mm.
And sometimes that's been because of role, because of a whole series of new roles that have been being developed, and it's been about exploring, what that role is about. Sometimes it's been because of a particular topic or a particular problem. So I've definitely been involved in some that have been quite almost, we're going to meet once a month and this is how we're going to work together, and others where it's just you remember how far you engage is up to you, what you get involved in is up to you. And I definitely see benefits of both. I think the ones that I've seen work really well have needed a little bit of structure around them in order to kind of get them to that stage where they are sustainable and they do happen.
Yeah, I think that's it. I mean, as you were talking there, Liz, I think the thing that really stood out for me is the thing with peer learning is it's the people in the group who drive the learning. It isn't being driven from above, but as you say, it may be the learning manager or the group manager or whoever it may be that is, let's say, putting that structure there, giving the prompts, maybe just highlighting one or two things, but they aren't the ones driving it. It's very much coming from within the group. And I haven't got permission to talk about this group. It wasn't my client, so I'll just call them a large company. This was happening years ago, way before COVID. They set up their own sort of YouTube channel internally for their engineers. And that's a form of peer learning, isn't it? So their engineers would just
Absolutely,
do these very quick videos. If you find this widget really tricky, this is what I've learned. And that was just apparently that was the best thing on the company internet. So,
Yeah. And there's some brilliant examples. I mean, I think there's some really good examples in the NHS of peer learning and sharing of best practice and bringing people together in different forms to look at things like, patient care and quality, etc. There are some really good examples in education, and I've kind of seen a lot in organisations, as you say, where particular groups will kind of share their shortcuts and share what they're learning and their problem solving. I think what's really interesting, and one of the things that interests me about leadership, is there aren't many that cut across geographical, professional, specialist boundaries and look at things like leadership across different types and sizes of organisation and sectors, etc. And that does surprise me, because I think there's a lot of commonality there in problems and in challenges that people are facing. So yeah, I think it can happen in all sorts of different ways, can't it? Within an organisation, within a wider profession, over a wider geographical and interest spread as well.
yeah, and of course technology. And I can say this now, for very many years, I was late to the technological revolution because nobody cabled our street. I couldn't use Zoom or anything like that for so many years.
Bless you.
But now most of us can.
Mm,
That has broken down a lot of barriers, and it's made this collaborating with peers so much easier, hasn't it?
yeah.
So we don't have to be in the same workplace anymore. We can find them anywhere.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because it has made it easier, and I think it's opened up opportunities. Change always does, but it's also created some challenges. So, if you look at some of the trends coming out around how much collaboration there is now in between teams,
Mm,
I think in terms of within teams now, with the hybrid model, people are settling into some kind of pattern about how they stay connected. But I think we are still missing that broader connection across companies. And it's starting to come through in some of the research now that some of the kind of cross-team collaboration that came together for the pandemic, where it was very much needed, is now starting to fall back a little bit. Maybe we're going a bit more into silos in some areas. And again, I think that's something that is missing a little bit at the moment, and that actually is going to kind of jump up and bite us a little bit. That we're, most of what we're dealing with today in terms of challenges and in terms of change, it's complex. It involves lots of interdependencies. We have to think of things a bit more systemically, I think, rather than thinking about our own areas. And I think peer learning can be a great way of doing that and opening up people's perspectives, knowledge, understanding of what other people are doing, and collaborating to solve more complex problems, not from an expert position, but from actually, how do we get together? What could we do to work on this? I think it's a great way of doing that.
I mean, there's a couple of things as you were speaking there, Liz. As you rightly say, we're having fewer of those water cooler moments, aren't we? I mean, certainly as trainers, we're not going into offices as often. We're doing more virtually. So you're not having those random conversations, and people who work
Yeah.
within businesses aren't having as many random conversations because of the hybrid working. So I think that is a missed opportunity, which is why you were saying about having a more conscious approach to peer learning is something that we perhaps need to be able to do, to say, actually, it's okay to schedule a half-hour chat with some colleagues. Let's get a virtual coffee break together. I mean, years ago, I was working with a bank, and we were just doing quite a standard management development program, if there is such a thing. And the training manager took me aside. We'd done quite a few of these programs, and she went, "Sheridan, I just want to give you some feedback. It's going really well." She said, "But please don't take this the wrong way. They're getting just as much value from being forced to sit in a room together." And so I don't take that the wrong way at all. I know exactly what you mean, because those little side conversations were just, oh, I didn't know you worked on that. Oh, do you know so and so? Oh, have you come across? Yeah, talk to me afterwards.
Yeah.
And it's that a lot of time, I think the solutions are hidden in plain sight, but when we are too blinkered and too focused, we miss out on so much. But the one thing I want to ask a question, and I may be taking it off a little bit off here, because we talked about making reaching out to people, making a more conscious effort. And maybe it's because I am a woman, but I feel that the women are embracing this peer learning perhaps a little bit more than our male colleagues. I don't know. That's just my
Okay.
impression. But certainly the communities that I'm in are majority women.
It's a really interesting one, isn't it? I think I see that a little bit in the communities I'm part of. And I wonder how much that is because women are engaging in it more, or it's just where I'm showing up, because there's always that question, isn't there, about, well, if I'm attracted to that, well, is that attracting other people that look and think and behave like me?
That's why it may be completely erroneous. But
yeah, I think it's an interesting question to ask. I mean, I guess what I observe is that women are great social networkers. They're great at peer learning, outside of the workplace, aren't they? I'm, include myself in that. We kind of build our support networks. We have those people around us that support us in all sorts of different ways when we need it, and we're great at that social networking. I think what I see sometimes, particularly with leaders in organisations, is that lack of confidence. I do see it in men as well, but I think for all sorts of reasons, I think sometimes women want to protect the teams that they're in, so they want to kind of give that impression that everything's okay, nothing's changing. They want to be protective. But I think there's also a confidence thing about going out and engaging with other people outside of your immediate circle. So every single time what I observe is people are nervous about engaging in a peer learning environment because of what they might bring to it. But every single time afterwards, people are so excited and full of energy, and they've really enjoyed it, and they've both got something from it and given something, which we come back to that exchange piece again. So I've got a bit of a mixed views on that. I think sometimes actually women need a little bit of encouragement and support, especially where those peer learning groups are mixed. And that might be mixed in seniority, that might be mixed in the types of roles that are showing up, and the people that we won't know, etc. So yeah, it's maybe we've had slightly different experiences of that.
Or maybe it just shows up in a different way. I mean, I know that obviously our male colleagues, of course, they learn from each other. It's
Yeah.
it's how
Oh,
people
yeah.
learn. I mean, it's been proven.
course.
This is how we all learn from each other all the time. Maybe it's, I don't know, like I say, maybe it's just where we're showing up. Maybe they're the sort of environments that are attractive to us. And maybe there's possibly some gentlemen sitting listening to this going, but the group I'm in, it's loads of fellas turn up all the time.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's I think it's perhaps just it's another way of learning, and it's a way of learning that's always been there, but we've given it a name now, and it's become a little bit more formalized. So maybe we're just a bit more aware of it. So perhaps
Yeah.
looking out for it a bit more.
I think the other thing that I'd like to throw into the mix, that I think has become obviously a bit of a kind of higher priority for people at the moment, is around belonging. So I think what these peer learning groups can do, particularly again, what I see for leaders is it's quite, leadership is a really hard position in any organisation at any level. As it's the hardest thing to do, and particularly at the moment with, the complexity and the uncertainty that everybody is being faced with. I don't speak to anybody that just kind of goes, you know what, I've got it sorted, that everything's all right, I can take a bit of time off. Everyone's more, quicker. And that is relentless, isn't it?
It is.
And we're balancing all sorts of other things outside of work as well. And what I see in the peer learning groups is another way of building some real belonging. And when we look at organizations and we look at wanting to build your talent pipeline, we look at wanting to retain people, we know how important belonging is on all sorts of different levels, both in terms of me personally and thinking about how an organization, meets some of my needs and matches with my values. There was some really interesting research that the London School of Economics did on transformational change post-pandemic, and belonging was a really key factor in whether organisations were able to make the changes or not. So that sense of feeling involved, feeling listened to, feeling that you're in a place where you belong. And I think peer learning can really deliver some of that, because that's where we get to, in a safe space, hopefully, talk about what it is we're finding challenging, what problems we've got. That's where we get to collaborate to solve some of that. That's where we get also as people with experience to share some of that experience to help others, that are maybe going through things that we've already had the chance to do some learning about. So I think that is a real key thing for organisations at the moment, and we're missing a trick a little bit.
Yeah, I mean,
Because
it is. It's a great way. I mean, I sort of jotted down before we started speaking. It's about Scarf. David Rock's Scarf.
yes, yeah.
And I think peer learning does give us the opportunity to have a little bit of status, because I know something and I can share that. It gives us that certainty because I'm getting advice from someone who I trust. I know them. I trust them. They're not going to lead me up the garden path. It's that autonomy, because I choose what to do with this information. It's not my boss telling me what to do. It's not a trainer telling me what to do.
Yeah.
It's down to me. And then, of course, the relationships that you've expanded on so well. So I think there's definitely a lot of that. And it's about the agility, isn't it? And it's about the satisfaction of solving a problem and that legacy element as well. I mean,
Yeah.
that's... And I was reading an article, and I can't for the life, I couldn't reference it even if you asked me to, because that's not how my brain works. But there is
No.
something to do with peer learning as well. It's a brilliant way to sort of, for knowledge management within a business, isn't it? And
Yes,
that
definitely.
passing it on and keeping the talent within the company, was the more we can cross fertilize, the better that is for everybody, because we're learning in the flow of work.
Yeah.
And I know it's often misquoted and all the rest of it, but the sort of Charles Jennings 70-20-10 thing, peer learning is right there in that 70%, isn't it?
Yeah,
We work something out with the help of our peers as we're doing it.
Yeah, it's really interesting because one of the earlier podcasts, the hybrid one, with they were talking about the 70-20-10, and maybe how some of those areas start to merge, and we think about them more flexibly. So
Yeah,
peer learning can actually sit in any of those. In
it
any
can.
of those areas. And I really like that idea of, even when you're doing formal learning, that it's less about somebody at the front teaching you, and it's more about actually how do we get curious about some of these challenges that we're facing. I mean, one of the biggest challenges I've had with setting up and managing peer learning spaces is, no matter how much you tell people, some people will still turn up with the expectation that someone's going to present to them for an hour, and they can be cooking their dinner and doing some other things. Now, I kind of get all that, we're all multitasking, but even though I say this isn't about somebody talking to you, you will be working collectively with a group and exploring things, and you can engage in that kind of as much as you want. But I think one of the things the pandemic has done, everyone went online, didn't they? There's so many webinars available. There's so much
Yeah.
content. So for me, it's really interesting about how do we create those reflective thinking spaces where leaders and groups can really think about the impact they're having and how they improve their practice. And I think what you were saying there around grounded in reality, so grounded in other people who are also in similar situations or similar roles, or wanting to achieve something similar, because there's nothing like we're in it, our view and our experience of it will always be different than somebody that's brought in from outside, which
Yeah.
can also add value, but we don't do enough of that mining of the knowledge and the expertise that's within, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, and that's something, within the community that I manage, is it's that sounding board,
Yeah,
that's so
yeah,
powerful to people. So I've been looking into this, or I'm thinking about doing that. Can I just sense check it with you?
yeah,
And
yeah,
just the thoughts that come from other people, some people with lots of relevant experience, other people with nothing, but still saying, well, as an observer or as an outsider, this would be
yeah,
my first thought. It's just invaluable,
yeah.
because I think you said quite at the start there, Liz, that sometimes it's to do with confidence, not so much with competence. So you don't need to go on a course or get a qualification. You just need someone with perhaps a bit more experience or a different perspective to run things by and say, oh yeah, that sounds good, and oh, do you want to see how I do it? Do you want me to chat you through it? Because quite often that's all we need to have the confidence to actually try something new, to upskill, and it's this incremental improvement, isn't it? And I think peer learning really helps us to improve incrementally rather than expecting to take big leaps, which can feel very, very scary.
Yeah, yeah, it's more like continuous improvement,
Mm,
isn't it? It's or continuing to kind of look at a topic and look at how you develop that. And as you said before, it can be formal, informal. It shows up in all sorts of different ways. So people, will be engaging in peer learning all the time, both in a professional sense and
mm,
outside of their profession as well. Um, and, I don't think we need to worry too much about labels, but I think sometimes when we're thinking about, maybe thinking about our own development, or if we're in L&D and we're thinking about the areas that, we want to help the organisation develop in or teams develop in, I think sometimes thinking about that peer-to-peer. That thing that you were just talking about around people getting excited about talking to each other. So just recently I was running an event for a college, and one of the things we did is we got people to partner up with individuals that they didn't know and they wouldn't normally get the chance to work with, to work with some of the things that we'd kind of been talking about in between the sessions. Done it a million times, nothing really innovative about that. But the buzz in the room, everyone got their calendars out, they were off speaking to the partners, they're like, oh, I'm so excited that we can kind of work together and we can have some more conversations about this. And again, when we're doing, when we're creating environments, whether it's virtual or whether it's face-to-face, building in that time where that peer learning can happen. One of the biggest pieces of feedback, I sat on the CIPD Manchester branch committee for a long time, and one of the biggest pieces of feedback we always used to get was, no matter how much you built it in, people wanted more time for that networking and talking to people around the sessions. They want the topics as well, but they want more time just to speak to people in breakouts, get to know what's happening in their organisations. It's peer learning.
Yeah. And I think it's just sort of going slightly off at a bit of an angle. And I was just thinking when you were talking there about why do we find talking to people who are like us so valuable? I find a conversation with somebody, who's a practitioner like me, nothing special, just doing their job. I find that a lot more valuable than listening to a thought leader or someone who's, got 16 books out and, as a keynote speaker. I mean, whilst they're interesting, don't get me wrong, they're interesting, but I don't know. For me, it's perhaps a little, maybe it's the way I learn. I find that a little bit too top level, a little bit too sanitized, maybe. Whereas speaking to a peer, they will tell me how it is, warts and all. They use language I understand. I feel I can ask a lot of questions and I won't look stupid if I ask a question, because we're equal. And I don't know if that maybe brings down some barriers that might be associated with more formal and more traditional learning. I don't know.
I think it's a really interesting observation, isn't it? I think I like a bit of both, but I'm also kind of very aware that I'm very practically minded, and so I have to be able to, I don't mind taking something away that I need to think about, but at some point I need to kind of work out what I want to do with it. And I think sometimes I don't like things that are too theoretical and aren't grounded in practice at all. And I think that's what you're talking about. It's about talking with somebody who's done this on the ground, knows the challenges, and is going to come at it from a very practical perspective. So I can definitely see value in both. But I agree with you. I think kind of speaking to your peers, it quite often resonates with you, doesn't it? About, in terms of just talking about challenges. So in the peer, in the leadership peer network that I run, the biggest thing is when people share their problems and their challenges, and they think they are the only one, and they think they're struggling with leadership because they've got this challenge, and then everyone else kind of goes, oh yes, we've got a bit of that as well, and then they can kind of really work together then on, I've tried this, or how can we explore that in a different way.
And the exact same thing happens in our designer drop-ins that we have every week with the trainers. It's like, I'm really struggling to bring this to life, and it's like, oh well, I did that 6 months ago, or I saw this activity, and all of a sudden that problem is so much easier to cope with, isn't it?
And coming back again to the flip side of that is the delight I see when people come away thinking, I helped someone else's thinking.
Yes.
So, when we're thinking about reward in a very challenging context right now where, we know organisations haven't necessarily always got lots of spare cash, where, we know that retention is an issue. Actually,
peer learning's free.
Well, it's not exactly free because there is a time element of it, but it is about using your own resources. And there's that whole thing, you were talking about knowledge. I'm really interested in wisdom. in what's
Yes. Yeah.
wisdom
Yeah.
rather than learning. So, that whole passing on our wisdom. And that kind of brings me back to females and female circles. So I'm also interested in it from that perspective of, of the historical nature of female circles and passing down wisdom and how we do that as well.
Yes.
So, it's very interesting from all sorts of different perspectives. That is definitely going off on a different track, but I
But I
think
think
it's
I was going to say I think it does lead us into a question that's so what can we do to develop our peer learning? If we want it to be more conscious, because obviously we're both real advocates.
mm.
Um, what can we do to encourage people to embrace it and do more of it?
So you mean what can we do as individuals, or what can we do?
Um, just as individuals, I think.
So let me think. I think I would start with doing a little bit of looking around at what networks are around you, because I think there's probably an awful lot going on that we don't know. So I'd
Mm,
probably start with just thinking, where could I engage more? What might I get from that? Have a look what's in your organisation. Have a look what's in your profession, maybe. Have a talk to your friends and people that you do collaborate with. And I was working with someone actually earlier today on the different types of things that you might get from involvement in different kind of learning activities. So maybe think about, what do you need for your development? What do you
mhm.
need for your role in terms of your operational? What might you need in terms of your kind of strategic thinking? So maybe think about that. I think the second thing I would say, and particularly for women, is look outside of your organisation.
Mhm.
So I just know so many people who stay within their organisation, and that is about a confidence thing.
Mm,
And I can guarantee, if you reach out and you engage in a wider um, peer learning network, you will absolutely benefit from it. So to
yeah.
build more insight and to build more confidence. And then I guess a third thing you could think about is maybe you could set something up. Maybe you could, it doesn't have to be huge, but maybe you could think, if there is a gap for you, there's probably a gap for others as well.
Mm,
So maybe when you've looked at what's around you, you could have a think about, do I want to kick
mm.
something off?
Good point. Good
What
point.
about you? What would your top tips
Well,
be?
I'm a massive fan of communities, as you know, but I'm going to go the other way with this. And I'm going to say
Okay.
um, easy things that we can do is, I mean, I'm very active on LinkedIn. I know a lot of people are, and we make new LinkedIn connections all the time. And every now and then someone will say, let's have a virtual coffee. And I perhaps don't take that up as much as I should. So maybe
Okay.
we ought
Okay.
to, just even if
More
it is
coffees.
just 20 minutes, and let's
Yeah.
just have a chat and find out what you do, because you don't know what you don't know. And
Yeah.
it's fascinating to hear what other people do, and just you never know when that might be useful. So that's perhaps one thing I would do. And if you're in an organization, and I know time is so precious, but what I said before about we're missing those water cooler moments. So
Mm.
maybe, it would be a bit of a culture shock, I guess, in a lot of places, but to have the chit chat at the start or the end of the meeting. So actually, can you all get here at 9:45, because we're going to have a coffee and we're going to have a chat, and then we're going to start the meeting at 10. Maybe that would be something that would work. Um, I don't know. And then the third thing, because you did three, so I'll do three as well, is to give before you receive. So
Mm.
offer things out, listen to what people are asking for, offer your help.
Mm.
And then, of course, what goes around comes around. And it's amazing what doors that will open.
Love that, love that, love that. Offer first. And I also really like that idea at the beginning of team meetings. And, and maybe as a build on that, maybe, do something at the beginning or at the end of team meetings that just shares,
Yeah,
what have we learned recently? What have we achieved? What's gone really well? Because I think we've got out of the habit of all of that. I think it's meeting, after meeting. So yeah, how can we use those spaces at the beginning and at the end
yeah,
to generate a little bit of peer learning very quickly? It doesn't have to be something that's, we've got 2 hours set aside and we have to travel somewhere differently to do
exactly.
it. So yeah, I really like those recommendations.
Yeah, because of course before we were all virtual, when you had a meeting, people would arrive early and people would linger afterwards, wouldn't they? And they'd just have these little catch-ups, and that doesn't happen quite so much now.
No.
What was I going to say? Something else to do with the peer learning setting. Oh yes, it was to do with the formal programs as well. As someone who's designed training for very many years, and we like the structure, we like the outcomes, we like the timetables and all the rest of it. But it comes back to what you said at the start. It's about letting go a little bit of the control. So
definitely,
as part of our development programs, let's build in some elements, whether that is a community chat function on whatever format you use, whether it is informal buddy systems, but touch points where people can learn informally from each other without the control or the direction of the person who's managing the program. Because the most successful management development program I was ever involved with, I can't take full credit for it, I only did half of it. The thing that truly made it a success, if I'm totally honest, was the fact that they went through as a cohort, they bonded as a team, and they supported each other, and they were on the phone to each other, and they'd pop in to each other's offices, and it made such a huge difference for them applying their learning and seeing the differences. So yes, the program was good, there was formal coaching, but that was the magic sauce, I think, that really made that program particularly successful.
So it's about spaces, isn't it? Less focus on I want this particular outcome at this time from this session, and more about, can I create the conditions, can I create a space in which people can come together and and that takes a bit of trust, doesn't it? And
it does.
Psychological safety, in terms of thinking this is an investment.
Yes.
I might not be able to see immediately, but actually longer term, I'm building those learning habits. I'm building that ability for people to know who to go to, who to have the conversations with, how to learn, how to problem solve together, and that's going to be so beneficial for organisations, I think, going forward.
It is, but it's also quite brave, isn't it? Because we can't measure it, we can't tick it off a list. And when organisations are tasked with providing metrics for everything they do, it's very difficult to say, oh well, Jan and Trevor, they had a lunch together and they got immense value out of that. Well, what was that value and how are they applying it? Not everything can be measured. In fact, there's a great quote, and I'll no doubt get it wrong now. Not everything that counts can be measured. Not everything that can be measured counts.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that's true of peer learning.
Brilliant. Well, it's been great talking to you about peer learning today. I've really enjoyed the conversation, and thanks to Andrew for inviting us.
Yeah, it's insightful as always, Liz. You always really broaden my mind whenever we have a chat. So thank you very much for joining me today.
Oh, what a lovely piece of feedback. Thanks, Sheridan. Likewise, right back at you. Speak to you soon.
Okay, bye.
Bye.
There's so much in this conversation I'm going to need to go back to. When we were recording, I realised I wasn't looking for the links and so on that I usually do. I ended up having to listen back to it at least twice, I think it is, to capture all the things that our two brilliant guests referenced. All the links are detailed in the show notes. A massive thank you to Sheridan and Liz for their time and producing such a great podcast episode. I know this will become a favourite. Their contact details are in the show notes, along with links to our website, future episodes, and to our donation page. We're back soon with another episode of Women Talking About Learning, and next time it's the ambition one. As always, thanks for listening, and we'll see you again soon.